of part 3 of the Mr. GLOAT Podcast, the story to the road to the undisputed heavyweight championship. This time, it's not the heavyweight championship in the four belt category anymore, guys. I already talked about that several months ago before the first fight of Usyk and Fury, and we all know how those fights happen, and I've been following around ever since. So it's going to be interesting, guys. But the title of this video might be a little bit confusing because you viewers might think to yourself, "Wait a minute, there's females in the heavyweight?" Yes, and kind of. And you might think to yourself, "So there's females in the cruiserweight?" No, never in a million years. But what about the light heavyweight? Kind of. Just kind of. What about the super middleweight? Yeah, a little bit. And the middleweight? Yeah, there's plenty. Like, I don't know what to say about this because even when looking this up on BoxRec right now, as I'm recording this, because it's January the 6th as we speak, guys, the road to the women's undisputed heavyweight championship is going to be interesting. And even though this is a 3-part podcast I'm doing, part 1 is going to be talking about the titles that do not really exist as a major anymore, while part 2 are the major belts that will exist. And what I mean by that, guys, this might confuse you viewers a lot, but did you viewers know that before the WBA, WBC, WBO, and IBF, and maybe the IBO had women's titles in the mid 2000s? But did you viewers know that there were another major title in women's boxing before those titles exist? Because fun fact though, in 2005 is when the WBC and WBA announced that they were going to have a female boxing title in every weight class in the women's boxing division. Only those were the 2 championships. And by 2005 to 2009, the WBC and the WBA were the only titles that were undisputed. Holly Holm became champion before, and a couple other females became champion as well. And if you want me to look it up, I'll look it up for you viewers right now so you understand, because I've already searched this already. If you look up on nwikipedia.org and type in list of female undisputed world boxing champions, you'll hear that the criteria says 2009 to the present states that a boxer who holds WBA, WBC, IBF, and WBO world titles simultaneously is the thing. But back in the old days, they never had that. Like I said before, guys, 2005 and probably in 2006 were titles that the WBA and WBC were actually formed by those 2 organizations. And by 2009 is when the IBF and WBO made their own titles for female boxing. And like I said before, guys, these were the undisputed champions in the 2-belt era in 2005 to 2009. It was Natasha Ragacina, WBA and WBC super middleweight champion, and she retained it until she regained it the end when the undisputed reign ended in 2009, even though she retired that same year, or maybe a year later, but who knows. WBC and WBA light middleweight champion, or I would say super welterweight champion, Giselle Salandi, rest in peace, as she passed away in a car accident at the time when she was undefeated and she was a legend. Holly Holm, we all know her. She was a undisputed welterweight champion, but never held on to it as much, and that's about it. As of right now, we have Amanda Serrano, featherweight undisputed, Alicia Baumgartner, super featherweight, Katie Taylor, lightweight champion, Chantel Cameron, she was a light welterweight, or sort of a super lightweight champion, but of course Katie Taylor defeated her, making her champion. Cecilia Breckhouse was the first ever 4-belt champion in the welterweight and in all women's boxing, and she held it longer than anyone else until Jessica Mascaro took her on in 2020, and that to that day it still upsets me to this very day. And Clarissa Shields, yeah, nothing much to say about her. Middleweight, she was the super welterweight champion 2021 in that division, and Middleweight undisputed twice in 2019 and 2022. Franchon Cruz Dazum becomes the first super middleweight undisputed in the four belt era in that super middleweight to become champion in 2022. She never retained it. She held on for a full year until Savannah Marshall defeated her on July the 1st, but the titles, part of them were vacant, so yeah, who knows. So yeah. Oh yeah, and also Senicia Estrada 2024. Yep, minimum weight champion. She was undisputed. So yeah, that's about it for undisputed. And also, guys, this is when the moments get more confusing. Now, guys, I've talked about the history about women's boxing and the titles and the champions and everything else, the currents. And like I said before, guys, it's no different because in champions, it's obvious. Now, guys, here's the thing I want you viewers to know about the championship division. And even though people have to understand, current female world champions are so different in today's world than anything else. For instance, the atomweight division is actually the lowest division in female boxing, which is one less than the minimum weight division, which is what the male boxers have. The minimum weight division is their least in men's boxing, but in women's boxing, they take a few extra pounds off in the light minimum weight, junior mini flyweight, autumn weight, whatever you like to call it. That's what they do. And fun fact, they say that there's going to be an undisputed title for that right now against Tina Rupertchet from Germany, the one that lost against, yep, the former minimum weight undisputed champion, taking on Samiri Yamanaka. And I wish her best of luck if she makes it champion, learns from her mistakes from her other Japanese friend that lost against Rupertchet. But yeah, sorry for talking too much. It's been 7 minutes since this podcast started, but I just want you viewers to understand the story about women's boxing before I get to the story of it. So like I said before, guys, 2009 female boxers have all of the original titles that the men's boxing have. But in heavyweight division, it's different because the heavyweight division brings in a mask of huge grown men in boxing as champions. But the thing is, it's not that simple when you look at from a perspective point of view. Because yes, all boxers, the four belt category is still a thing today. And even though in 2020, the WBC announced that they were going to create a new division, which is the Bridgerweight division, which was related to a kid that saved her sister from a dog attack in 2020 during the COVID virus. And I hope that kid and his sister are doing okay today. I still pray for them. I hope they're doing all right. And of course, the WBC decided to honor them, their own division, because of that. So, yeah. Good job, but yeah. So at this moment, you can already tell the worst is about to come because originally by the end of 2000, the 2010s, before the 2020s became the decade, males boxing of the highest or the unlimited in heavyweight division is 200 pounds over. If you're 201 quarter pound, that means you're in the heavyweight. If you're 200 pounds, you're still cruiserweight. Keep that in mind. The IBF and WBO still hold that to this very day. Two of those four major sanctioned bodies still have that. But the WBC and the WBA don't. So WBC decided to rank it up to 200 and a quarter to 224 pounds as classification of the Bridgerweight. And in 2023, the WBA followed suit as well. But in female boxing, guys, female boxing holds a little bit of ridiculousness, and let me explain it to you. Let me type in the list of current female boxing champions right here on Wikipedia. So, guys, I've made this list. I've talked about this a bunch of times, but if you guys haven't seen my content as much, let me explain. So, like I said before, guys, the cruiserweight division, women's boxing, has all of their belts. There's no such thing as WBA, WBC, IBF, or the Ring magazine. And it does show the word WBO vacant. The thing is, guys, it's been a ridiculous thing. Because around this time in the mid-2000s, when boxing was getting bigger, is when the WBC decided to honor another belt at the time in the women's division, and that was the heavyweight. And we will talk about that soon enough in this podcast. But and when I get to it, I'll get to it. The IBF did not become a part of the sanctioning until a long time, and we'll get to that some other time. But yeah, like I said before, guys, the WBC and the IBF are the only two heavyweight titles ever been fought by females in the heavyweight. And the WBO and the WBA haven't been fought since. It's never existed until February the 2nd, 2024, where Clarissa Shields is going to take on a little bit of an unknown, undefeated 5-0 prospect that's in her full 40s right now, and she made a comeback this year in 2024, fighting against this monster in Flint, Michigan. So whoever's going to become the undisputed female champion, I hope they'll bring the heavyweight division up for females, and we'll see what happens. And that's the main reason why I'm doing this 3-part podcast of the undisputed for women's in the heavyweights, because of it. Because part 3 will be my review after that fight is over. So stay tuned for that. For the next 4 weeks, I have a lot of information to put out here. But that's not the point of this episode. So, and even though I'm 11 minutes into this podcast, I'm going to try to explain it properly. So I want you viewers to listen. So the cruiserweight and the junior heavyweight of the women's boxing says that if you're at 200 pounds, similar to the men, you are in the heavyweight or a cruiserweight. And like I said before, guys, in middleweight and super middleweight, similar to men's boxing, women have to be at that weight as well at that time. So if you're 260 and a quarter to 268 pounds, you're in the super middleweight. But if you're at 168 and a quarter pounds, that means you are in the light heavyweight. And of course, if you're still 175 and a quarter pounds, you're in cruiserweight. But yet again, it also affects the value of the heavyweight. Because then I click on another link here called the Wikipedia heavyweight, which is heavyweight, which shows the current champions as of right now today. And it says right here on the professional, which as I just read before about how the Bridgeweight division became of the WBC and WBA, it also points out here that female boxers who weigh over 175 pounds are considered heavyweights by 2 of the 4 major boxing organizations, which is the IBF and the WBC. The WBA and the WBO do not have a female world heavyweight title. That is until February the 2nd this year of 2025. So, yeah. Doesn't really make sense. And when I click on the list of current female boxing champions on Wikipedia, not only it still says light heavyweight boxer says that females have to be at 175 pounds to be in that division, but in the heavyweight, if you're at 200 plus pounds, which is 200 and a quarter or unlimited, you're in the heavyweight. But it also says that now, this is what it reads here. It reads here that heavyweight plus 200 pounds / plus 90.7 kilograms. Or, keep that word in mind, or plus 168 pounds / plus 76.2 kilograms. Or if you're 168 and a quarter, you would be eligible to be in the heavyweights, even though you're in the light heavyweight. Like, if you guys read this and look this information up yourself, you would be really, really confused. And I have a lot of information. I'm going to put this in the description below. So you guys, it really does confuse you viewers. And I'm not trying to confuse you viewers. I'm trying to explain this as best I can, but it really does get confusing. And as said before, guys, on July the 27th, 2024, in the same venue where Clarissa Shields is going to fight for Undisputed, as well in Little Caesars Arena, which is a completely different venue because mostly it's the same, not the same, not the same. Her like I said before, her last win was in July and also Detroit in the Little Caesars Arena. But even though she is going to fight in Michigan, which is where Detroit is, but also in Flint, Michigan, she had a fight against Vanessa LePage that was WBC champion at the time. They also put on the line the WBF World Heavyweight Champion, which I can actually think about calling it a legit title, and the WBO World Light Heavyweight Championship. Does it make sense? No. And even the video on YouTube that shows the full fight is titled Four-Time Weight Class Champion, which now makes it more confused because people at the time before that fight started stated that if Clarissa wins, she'll be a 4 weight class champion. Considering she was already the super welterweight, middleweight, and the super middleweight champion, which means even at this moment, they think that she was fighting for heavyweight title, not realizing that she was also fighting for a light heavyweight title, meaning that she would be a 5 weight class champion if she won. Guess what? She won by style in the second round by TKO. And as she puts on the merchandise, one of the commentators at the time during the aftermath of the fight stated that even though she has the merchandise for the WBC title, she also has the WBO World Light Heavyweight title. And this commentator points out that she has actually completed a similar fight like the Sugar Ray Leonard winning the light heavyweight title and the super middleweight title simultaneously the same night against his Leonard fight back in 1987. Like Sugar Ray Leonard had something similar that Clarissa Shields did this year. Sugar Ray Leonard at the time was already a part-time boxer at this time, but he might have not been in his prime at the time because he was fighting part-time. Even by 1982, he took a year off, went on 1994, came back in 87 to fight against Marvin Hagler, and then takes a full year and a half to defeat Donnie Lalonde. And that fight wasn't much special except him winning the inaugural WBC super middleweight title, and he won the WBC light heavyweight title. He fought in 2 weight classes in one fight, and Sugar Ray Leonard won that fight, making him a 5-time weight class champion. And the commentators even pointed that out that day. And even though the super middleweight was a new division at the time, so it made sense that they made a mistake. So he got rid of the light heavyweight title only to fight a couple more times for the WBC super middleweight title in his last year against Thomas Hearns in the draw and Roberto Duran in that waste of time trilogy until the rest of his career was nothing. But yeah, you can tell they really got confused because there was no such thing as a heavyweight title at that time in the WBO for women's boxing. So you can tell. So yeah, Clarissa Shields is still the WBO light heavyweight champion as of right now. So now she's also taken on, as on BoxRec, it says that her fighter is going to be Danielle Perkins. And this woman has 5 wins. Her first 2 wins was in 2020 in August and December. She took on undefeated fighter in her first fight, and another one that was also 1-0. So a good couple wins for her career, not bad. She has a rematch against her first fighter for the WBC silver heavyweight title in 2021. Then she left in March the 5th after that fight. Comes back 3 years later to fight her 4th fight against a 3-2 fighter and a 2-1 fighter in July the 27th. The same venue and show where Clarissa won her light heavyweight title. Now they're fighting undisputed for all the gold. It's ridiculous. So the IBF is vacant as of right now, and we'll get to that story some other time, but the WBA and the WBO are on the line as we speak. And for reasons how it took them this long, it has to be because Clarissa Shields is a star in boxing, and it makes sense that they want to put these titles on the line. But yet again, oh boy, there's going to be a lot of interesting talk about this, ladies and gentlemen, in the future. But yeah. That's just crazy. It's crazy for me to even hear about that, which is actually funny to this day because I just don't expect crazy stuff like this to happen. So, yeah, that's the information that we have to know about the heavyweight division and the light heavyweight division in women's boxing. And when you count how many females are in these divisions as we speak, there's only 18 females in the heavyweight division. And mostly 10 of them have a half a star to 5 stars. And some of their records and resumes are not good. Just have people with only a few wins and some a couple undefeated other fighters with no wins, and people that only had one fight, which might have been a loss or a win or nothing. There's not a lot of competition. And the cruiserweight is nothing, 0% as we speak. As for the light heavyweight, we have 28 and fighters right now, and over 13 of them have more than several fights, and the others have a loss or multiple losses or just nothing. It's ridiculous. There's just not a lot of competition in the light heavyweight for female boxing, which is crazy. The super middleweight division only has 40 females, and of course, a lot of them have only one fights, which were losses, and other fights against nobodies, and they come from different parts of the country. It's ridiculous, and there's not a lot of interesting talent to be involved as long as you can get lucky fighting against the fighters you want to fight. But yeah, and as for the middleweight, we only have 38, and of course, just there's a little bit of talent, but not a lot there. And as for the super welterweight division, we have a lot. Barely, just barely. 63 in the super welterweight division. And of course, if you go to welterweight and everything else in other divisions, they'll add up to over 100. So, and the rest of the divisions might be more. So there's not a lot of females competing in the bigger divisions because we don't have a lot of big females. And when you look up these fighters and you know their body shapes, a lot of females aren't tall. It's not like how Vonda Ward was a really tall 6-foot woman that was a former basketball player, and she had a body that she didn't look like heavyweight material, but her height and tall did have that strength into her. But you have these females that are 5'8" or 5'6", and they have big tummies and they're 200 pounds. It just seems really amateurish and a little bit not entertaining for fans to watch this on TV, and it does make it hard. So it makes sense. And even though Quissa Shields is not a tall woman, she's 5'8", not bad for a weight into the super middleweight or even the light heavyweight, to be honest. But yeah, and even though at 168.25 pounds is the much you can be if you want to be in the heavyweight, it doesn't matter if you're at 175 pounds or not. You can box at heavyweight. I guess it made sense why they decided to change that rule for making females box in these divisions. But if that's the case, can they at least just get rid of the cruiserweight thing here on Wikipedia? Just eliminate this cruiserweight, get rid of it. There's no need for it. And we don't need to have a bridgerweight as well in this because females are not going to be involved in the crap. So why not? Like, just take the heavyweight, keep the light heavyweight, shrink it up to 168.25 pounds to 175, and just keep it at that. If we have enough basketball players of females, if we do have females that might be 6 feet tall or something, and they could be at 175 pounds, it's good. Like, guys, we have a female boxer that's the WBA light heavyweight champion named Chi Connealy, and her body shape and everything doesn't look like that she's a big woman. Like, she's tall and she has a great body, and she looks like she can actually perform great competition. She has a body like Vonda Ward, and she's not overweight. She can almost destroy the light heavyweight division if she wants to. Like, Chi Connealy seems like the woman that can actually be another great star in boxing. And I wish her best of luck because Chi Connealy from New South Wales, Sydney, Australia, I wish her best of luck. And even though she is going to turn 30 years old this month in February the 2nd, go figure for that. And she is the WBA champion in July of last year ago in 2024. So good job for her. I hope she'll have more wins, and I hope we can have a fight with her and Quissa Shields in the future if they decide to go light heavyweight undisputed this year or next year. So yeah, and also Lonnie Daniels is the IBF light heavyweight champion. The WBC does not exist in the light heavyweight as we speak. So it is what it is. It is what it is. So Yeah, sometimes there's a lot of body shapes we can handle, but it seems like female boxers, there's just not a lot out there that want to compete in boxing because there's not a lot of competition. And when there's competition, there's a lot of, well, to be honest, I don't know what to say. And like I said before, guys, if you have seen some of the boxers back in the old days of boxing, and I don't want to offend anyone, I don't, because when I even look up inactive heavyweight boxers in female boxing, like Laura Ramsey or even mostly Martha Salazar, a woman that's 5'9", but she does weigh over a 230-pound basis in her career at her time when she boxed back in the old days of boxing. Or even Alejandro Jimenez. She weighed a good amount of weight in her career, even though she was 5'11", and she had some weight at her time. And she did went down to 160 pounds to be in a super middleweight fight, but that ended her career. So, but yeah, there's a lot of females that are not built as, like, you see them that they're like Mr. Potato Heads or Mrs. Potato Heads. No offense, no offense, no offense. I'm just saying I think it makes sense why it makes boxing incompetitive and not entertaining for television because of it, because we don't have a lot of fit bodies in women's boxing. And it made sense why Vonda Ward was the star of boxing in that division, because she was built as a perfect woman with a great body. She was 6'6". She was a basketball player, an All-American girl, and she was at 180 pounds, 88 pounds, which was the heaviest in her career, 190. Yeah, she was 190 or 90 pounds, under almost 200 pounds in her early career at the time. So, but due to her height, she could handle that. And we don't have a lot of females that are 6 feet tall, and a lot are in basketball. And I'm sure, even though there's still some females that are basketball players today, and they sometimes go up to play boxing or even MMA fights. So I do feel bad that there's not a lot of females today that want to compete in light heavyweight or heavyweight, or even try to get their matches on super middleweight before they make it big, like Savannah Marshall. And I do like what Clarissa Shields' strats are, because even though she's 5'8", she's not a tall woman. But hey, if Canelo Alvarez, a 5'8" tall guy, well, somewhat of a tall person, can defeat a 5'11" and a half tall guy of Sergey Kovalev for the WBO World Light Heavyweight title, it could be possible that you can see a great history in the makings there. So, yeah, who knows? Who knows? We just hope there's some things that might come here, but we might not know. But guys, there is one thing we have to point out. So now, guys, with all that being said, there's more to this than meets the eye, and I would like to talk about it right now. So, guys, remember that what I said, that women's boxing and titles of the WBO, WBA, WBC, and IBF did not exist until in 2005 and 2009. So, what would the women fight for in titles back in the old days? Well, here is the story right now. So, guys, in the 1990s and other years, we had a female boxer that did become a boxer in the 50s and 60s. And she did become one of the first females in history of boxing to ever create her own division and become in the Boxing Hall of Fame. Her name was Barbara Buttrick. She was a female that had 30 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw, but some in her resume in BoxRec doesn't see a lot. She was a champion, bantamweight champion, and a unbeaten flyweight champion in the 1950s and 60s, but there's not a lot of information of female boxing records today. So at the same time, there's not a lot to it. But at this time, guys, it seemed like there was not a lot of competition. And even though she's 95 years old and still lives today, but she's not in the CEO anymore, I think, but some people still think she is. In 1990, she decided to create, or in the mid 90s, she was in Florida at the time, where she founded and became the president of her own organization where females can have their own major titles. And some of these titles, they still exist today, but people today don't think they're majors anymore, but I still think they are today. And a lot of German females are still holding this title to this very day to give themselves a push. Some has worked, some haven't, but still, You had to fight for something. And that belt of the organization is the Women's International Boxing Federation. No relation to the International Boxing Federation organization of 1983. This is the WIBF organization, a sanctioned body of women's boxing. Now, I'll give respect. Buttrick has done a great job, and even though she was last known residence in Miami Beach, Florida, as of right now, and even though she is also one of the first females, as in 2014, she was International Women's Boxing Hall of Fame in Fort Lauderdale, but she also became a little bit of an interesting legend because in 2019, before COVID, she became one of the first three female boxers in history and the first English woman, because she was British, to be elected in the International Boxing Hall of Fame, and the first year that a woman were on the ballot. So, congrats for her. And her creating the women's IBF major at the time in the mid 90s has to be one of the greatest things for females because females didn't have a lot of legitimacy. Like and guys, if you're probably wondering, is there any information of those titles that she won in 1950 and 60 of the flyweight bantamweight? I can't find records of all of the divisions of women's boxing back then. It seemed like it's really hard to find to this day. So I really can't find the information. But all we know is the women's IBF and another division known as the women's IBA title, which is another one. And someone said the women's IBO title were a thing, but yeah, I don't think that exists, but I'll get to that in just a moment. But the women's IBA, which is also another division similar to the IBF of the WIBF division, does bring in an interesting stuff because the international women's organizations do hold a lot of interesting stuff. And I'm not saying that it's not the right thing to do because today people don't think these things are legit anymore, which I don't blame them, but I still think they do. And that is when we come to another halt because the Women's International Boxing Association, that would also be another division, would be established in July of 2000 by a little bit of an interesting purpose due to the organization. And the founder of Ryan Wislow and Luis Bello Diaz, guys that I really don't know much about other than them creating their own division. And a guy named Luis Bello was the head universe of the UBC, Universal Boxing Council, and sanctioned headquarters in Colombia. So, and they decided to make their other women's boxing division, which is still titled to this day. And there's a lot of women that don't have a lot of belts. And even though we also have a first Hong Kong female in the super bantamweight named Ruru Yang, that's the first champion in Hong Kong to become champion, thanks to the women's IBA. That happened last year ago, so take that for what you will. But yeah, those are the only two titles. And also, guys, don't forget my favorite, the IBA. Yep, the IBA. What else can you say about the IBA, ladies and gentlemen? Well, that belt does exist as well, and that will be for another time. I'm only going to be talking about the women's IBA and the women's IBF title on this list. But first, guys, considering we're 34 minutes into this podcast, probably another 26 minutes, I like to try something, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I went to Walmart, ladies and gentlemen, today, and considering I found a random thing. Now, this is not a Starbucks, but something interesting. This is a Snickers iced coffee. And I'm sorry for smiling like that because I am afraid because this might taste like crap. So, yeah, a Snickers iced coffee. Yeah. Not Starbucks, but by original artifact, I really don't know what I'm about to taste from this. So, let's just take a few minute break, ladies and gentlemen, from this podcast and start drinking this. Boy. All right. Okay. That was a pretty good pop. All right. Cheers to several years of failure, but I made a lot of good moments in my life, so cheers. Hmm. Not tasting a lot of that, but I'm tasting the iced coffee, though. I really don't know if I'm tasting the Snickers, but it tastes good. Just tastes like with milk, but can't say much about it. It doesn't taste bad. It just tastes not like Snickers, but it's decent. It's decent. Yeah, don't know what to say about that. Hmm. It just tastes like a normal iced coffee to me. If you guys can taste the Snickers, let me know. Maybe my taste buds are a little bit not there. Anyway, let's just get back to business. So, fun fact go. So, guys, the women's IBF do have a lot of undefeated fighters in boxing. So, let me explain. So, Michelle Aboro was a super bantamweight boxer in the 90s and in 2000s by her career. She was 21-0, undefeated, retired. She became the women's IBF champion in 2000 and retired in 2001, which makes her undefeated. And like I said before, guys, the undefeated female championships do state on the list of undefeated world boxing champions on Wikipedia, stating world titles from sanctioning agencies outside the WBA, WBC, WBO, and IBF, and outside the ring. Female world titles were inaugural by the four major sanctions in 2010, 2004, 2005, and 2009. I'm going to assume the WBC was the first to be the inaugural in 2004, and 2005 was the WBA. I'm going to assume that. I'm going to assume that. I might have been wrong, but if that's what Wikipedia says, it might be right. Because, fun fact, North Korean female boxers back in the day that are retired undefeated actually became the inaugural winners of these belts. Um, but of course, as it is, there's sometimes it's just ridiculous. So I'm not going to get into it because it doesn't really have anything to do with it. But yeah. And there's many others, like Layla Ali, Muhammad Ali's daughter, that was the IBA, which is the IBA International Boxing Association, which is a major for the female boxers. She won that title in 2002, including the women's IBF super middleweight in 2002 and 2004. And she was the women's IBA in 2002 and 2007 during her last title defense when she retired for good. But surprisingly, she was the women's IBF light heavyweight in 2004. She would win the WBC title in 2006, retained it a couple of times in 2000 until the end of 2007 and retired. So yeah, Natasha Rogozina, well, she had her own titles, and there is one we'll get to in a moment. Yeah, Lucia Rijeka was the women's IBF super lightweight and junior welterweight champion in 1997, but retired in 1998. It say that she's also the women's IBO title, question mark. And Kara Rowe, a 17-0 undefeated lightweight champion boxer, or now 18-0 retired undefeated, becoming the women's IBA title in 2005. And of course, Wang Yangnan, the greatest Chinese woman to ever come alive in boxing, was middleweight champion in the WBC in 2008, and in 2007, the women's IBA. So, yeah, at the time, people, before the organizations existed, we had undefeated boxers that were undefeated, even though if they didn't win any of the organization titles. Like I said before, the ring began, and fun fact though, it also says here that the ring began awarding titles to women in 2019, and 6 of the 15 weight classes are still uninaugurated as of September the 30th, 2022. I'm actually wondering, because now there might be more. There might be more as that was released. So, yeah. By the way, guys, 2009 might have been the year where the WBO might have existed, or maybe the IBF. And then in 2010, or maybe. Oh, no, I was reading this wrong. So the IBF was a sanction in the women's boxing until 2010. 2004 was the WBA. 2005 was the WBC. And 2009 was the WBO. Okay. I actually read that wrong. Okay. So that makes sense. So technically, I was wrong. So the WBA existed in 2004 for women's boxing. Yeah. So yeah, not a lot of champions at the time. Interesting. So now, guys, time to get down to business. So the titles of the IBF are pretty interesting. So the results as of today are simple. So the women's IBF title in boxing go as this. So I couldn't really find a lot of footage of this one. As in November 28, 2004, Martha Salazar would take on Pamela London, which will be another time we'll talk about her in just a second, would fight in Georgetown, Guyana for that WIBF title. Martha Salazar would win by round 9 by TKO in a 10-round 2-minute fight. So, and even when I even tried to understand why, but when I later realized that Pamela was actually a Guyanese woman, I started realizing something's up, because I realized that there are other females from other countries that had men in the heavyweights to never become champions in their division, which I question. Now, guys, there's no video footage of this fight, so we'll never know, but there is video footage in 2009 for the last time this title was on the line. So Martha Salazar vacated that belt, and that was it. The last time this belt was on the line was in December 19th, 2009 with Natasha Rogozina, or on BoxRec it calls her Natalia. She would fight against Pamela London 5 years later, she would get the second title bout. And this is the last time we would have this title on the line as of right now. 15 years. And this would be the last fight for Natasha Rogozina. She would retire undefeated with 22-0 and 13 knockouts. Wait, this was her last fight? And by the way, you're probably wondering, how much did she weigh? Well, Pamela London was 210 pounds in that first fight with Martha Salazar's 240 5 years ago. She's 237 pounds, and this would be her last boxing match. Well, I think it's going to be her last boxing match. No, her second last match. A year later, she would retire with a loss. But Natalia, she weighed 172 pounds in this fight. And surprisingly, she outboxed her opponent in Russia. And even though the video footage does show you that you're seeing a woman that does not belong in a heavyweight, but she had great skills. Now, I'm not saying Natasha Rogozina is better than Laila Ali, and they were both boxing in super middleweight back in the day. But Natalia came a little bit late on 2004, and, well, of course, Laila Ali decided to retire by the start of 2007, and she became undisputed in that super middleweight, as I said before. So it is what it is. So yeah, I'm not saying she was the best, but she did prove herself that day. And when you see the fight, she did end it with a great knockout in round 8, took her opponent down, and that was it. And even though Pamela got back up, the referee didn't want to see anymore, even though it was a 2-minute fight. It was a great retirement win for Natasha, and as a heavyweight fighter, is this the only female to ever retire undefeated in heavyweight? Like, let me see. Natasha, a undefeated heavyweight, something that Laila Ali did not do. Dang. And fun fact, she would actually fight for the WBF, World Boxing Federation title, that would also be on the line that same night, but we'll get to that later. And guys, I will talk about that fight of the Natasha fight and Pamela in part 2. I just want to get through this list quickly because I don't want to get to it yet. So what about the women's IBA title? Well, the women's IBA title is a whole different story. The women's IBA title is a huge problem of forgotten footage and information from around the world. And when looking it up, guys, as I'm doing it right now, because this is now new to me. Oh, wait, no, this is not new to me. I actually looked this information up a long time, even when I was in high school. So I really could not understand why there was no footage of these fights and titles for the IBA title. But yeah, it's been a long time since I actually looked up this information, like a year ago, or maybe 2 days ago, question mark. But yeah, I don't know if I would count this as an undefeated boxer, because the first woman to win the women's IBA title was a Colombian woman named Flor Maria Delgado. Not a lot of footage could be said about her other than she weighs over 200 pounds in all of her fights. And her first 9 professional fights in June 98 to June 2000 were fighters that were in their debuts. All of her wins were by knockouts by all 9 fighters in their debut, all in Colombia. And there's barely some photos online of her, so that's not well done. But yeah, in September the 8th, she takes on a 2-0 Maria Carranza Tatis, 2-0. And Delgado would beat her by round 4 TKO for the title. And that woman she took on against would have one more fight a year later for the women's IBA Liberian American heavyweight title. And won against a debut. Sheesh. But never fought again. She would actually, Delgado would also have a 3-0 fight against Mariana Garcia, a 3-0 fighter, and that woman's career was dead. Wow, really dead. And she knocked her out round 6 by TKO in Colombia and retained it. She retired for good, came back years later in February 2004 to have one more fight against an 0-3 fighter and won by round 4 knockout. She retired undefeated with 12 knockouts, all by wins. I don't know if I should count Flor Maria Delgado an undefeated champion, but yet again, there's no footage or stuff about the information. That's how hard it is for women's boxing to look up these information. It's ridiculous. And now we go to 2002, where we have the female fighter that was the unbeaten fighter that I would say probably interesting because this one takes the cake. And guys, while we're at it, how about I also talk about the original, not just the women's IBA title, but get this one out of the system and talk about the IBA world title as well. So in February 26, 1999, the IBA heavyweight title would be on the line against a woman named Shannon Hall, 168 pounds, versus 168 pounds as well, Suzetta Taylor, in the Casino Magic Bay in St. Louis, Mississippi. The promoter, unknown other than its Mississippi Athletic Commission, and that was the only fight on BoxRec. The fight was a 10-round fight where it showed Shannon Hall having two judges scoring an even 76-76 after 8 rounds, but she was winning 79-73 by one judge. She was 1-0 undefeated against Suzetta Taylor. That was 2-1-0, 2-1-1, and her record was after she had her first loss in her debut. Multiple nobody fights on this case, and Shannon Hall, a beautiful, somehow looked like a really great woman that did look like a woman named Dallas, had her first debut fight, and it looked like she was going to win, but lost by round 9 TKO. And Suzetta Taylor, well, she would vacate that belt away, and that heavyweight title would never be on the line again until July 16th, 2017. That same day where the women's IBA title was also on the line. And that was Monica McGowan losing by 10-round unanimous decision against the hero, All-American, Vonda Ward. Vonda Ward went on to become champion in that division, and somehow she was an unstoppable foe, or so we thought. And I don't want to get to that because I still get upset to that very day of how her career ended. With that, I just don't want to get to that. So yeah, by December the 6th, 2002, she takes on Kathy Rivers, wins a fight by round 8 TKO, retaining both titles, and so far so good. Not bad at all. And by July the 11th, she has against Martha Salazar. They already had a 4-round split decision fight some years ago, so they had a rematch, and Vonda retained it. Good job. And then, of course, around that time, she had a fight, blah, 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 against Ann Wolfe. First round KO loss of her career, 1 minute, blah, blah. The referee, Elmo Aldoff, stopped it. I even made comments of that fight saying how depressing it was. Some people in the comments said it doesn't bother me. I gave them the flipping birds. F this. Vonda Ward's boxing career was dead. It was dead. She had nothing. And it made sense that her boxing career was dead a year later. She retained it out. She went back to retain out her titles against Elizabeth Kieran, a nobody fighter, went round 2 KO, went on a 10-round nobody fight against some random non-title fight months later. And she even had a fight in December 24 after her 6-month first and only loss, and that was it. That was it. And before you know it, they would come back and have a match in February 2007 against Martha Salazar. And surprisingly, they went by majority decision. There is footage of that online. I'm surprised that I don't find any title fight footage of Vonda Ward and her defenses at the time. But I found this one by Salazar in their third match. And Vonda Ward would win that match squarely. Sadly, she would have a fight against a nobody fighter in February a year later against Charlotte Iwu, 10 rounds, and she would, in a non-title fight, and retire for good. So, yeah. And the IBA title would disappear for good. And to this day, it still says Vonda Ward's champion. But, yeah, it's ridiculous because the belt hasn't been on the line since that Salazar fight in February the 10th, 2007. So, yeah, that's all the information I have for the IBF and the women's well, not the women's IBA title, because surprisingly that title would be back on the line in Guyana against Gwendolyn O'Neill in her home country, even though she lives in Brooklyn, New York, would have her fight in her comeback after her multiple losses against Charlotte Ilu and Layla Ali and all her failures against that. She would finally get it against Veronica Blackman. And I couldn't find much footage about it other than they also had another title called the GBU, Global Boxing Union World Heavyweight title on the line that day. So, but there's nothing much about that information, so I won't get to that title because A, they only had one title fight, and that's the title I'm talking about. And surprisingly, yeah, O'Neill defeated Blackman by all three scorecards in her country, even though her opponent is also Guyanese as well. So great job for her. And yeah, that was the end of the Global Union title, but the IBA, Women's IBA, is still on the line. She would retain it 3 months later against Laura Ramsey, another woman that's 5'5" but weighs over 200 pounds in all of her fights. And yeah, that's a lot of beef. And O'Neill handled an 8-round fight because this women's IBA title was 8 rounds on the line. Yeah, surprisingly. And fun fact, she would fight against a non-title fight against Pamela London a couple months later after Pamela could not recover from her Natasha loss. So she lost one more fight and retired for good after that. She lost, O'Neill lost against someone in 2011, came back and had a fight against Pauline London, a nobody fighter, and surprisingly she won by split decision. Yeah. And then in 2015, she comes back 4 years after a long hiatus and fights for a UBF title, a UBF Universal title that's named the Universal Boxing Federation World Heavyweight title. That exists. And O'Neill won that fight. And then it was stripped and it was fought by some other girls named Sonia Lamonkis and Laura Ramsey in 2017. Ended in a draw. Huh. And that was the end of that title fight. Sheesh. There's not a lot of information of all these female boxing fights I'm talking about. Interesting. And the last title fight that the women's IBA title would ever be on the line, guys, would be in November 6, 2014. With Kathy Rivers taking on Lisa Maria Vezanaria. So, guys, even though we're only a couple minutes away from the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to end this episode now, but here's the information. Kathy Rivers' career has not gone nowhere. She took on losses against nobodies and lost against great fighters like O'Neill, Vonda Ward, and Valley Mahfoud. That was a forgotten fighter champion in her days. And, and Martha Salazar. She retired in 2007 and comes back 7 years later to take on this woman, for reasons how she's in the ranks, I don't know, named Lisa Marie. And by the looks of her, when you see her face, you think to yourself that she doesn't look like a woman, but yet again, I don't want to be in gender bender thing here. But yeah, let's not get into that. All we know is that her record, that she's from Australia. She fought in debut fights in 2001-2, had 2 other fights, one in 2003 and 4 against the same fighter named Ali Dutt, won both fights, and then she retired. Then she come back 4 years later. Fun fact, she was 238, 217, 218, 216 pounds in those 4 fights by 2001 to 2002, 2003, and 2004. Guess what? She comes back 8 years later, and Lisa Marie is 272 pounds, and her return fight is against the same woman she took on, Ali Dutt, for the WBF World Boxing Foundation heavyweight vacant title. Fun fact, that would be the only title that would be on the line. That was for the inaugural title, and that's the only time that that title was on the line in a female boxing fight, and Lisa Marie would win that fight. 6 months later, she takes on a debut fighter, wins. In May of 2013, she takes on a debut fighter, wins. And now, a full year and a half, she fights against Kathy Rivers. And this fight had a controversy. Now, there is footage on YouTube, and the fight ended. Both of these girls would retire for good after this. Kathy would never fight again, and Lisa would retire as well after this fight. The story goes that both females were on scorecards. They were battling their way, and after 9 rounds of competition, one judge had it 88 to 83 for Kathy, and 86 to 85 for Kathy, but the other also had 86 to 85 as well, but also for Lisa. And surprisingly, all Lisa had to do is that she scores a knockout in this 10th and final round, and she'll win by split decision because of that knockout. Because if she gets that other scorecard judge that has it 86 to 85 for Kathy, scores a knockout for 10-8, then it's going to be 95 to 94, and Kathy will lose. Well, guess what? In that 10th and final round, she will knock out her opponent and seal the deal. But guess what? She ends in style. Similar to the fight that we might know is controversial. And yeah, when I say controversial, I'm talking about the controversial fight I'm sure some of you people know when I actually tell you. Because, guys, remember that fight when Julio Cesar Chavez had a fight back in the old days? He took on a guy and he went 12 rounds with him. His name was Meldrick Taylor, and in 1990 he fought for the IBF and WBC World Super Lightweight title, and in the final seconds of the round, Chavez was losing by 2 scorecards that had it a wide lead for Taylor. He knocks him out in the final seconds of the round. Richard Steele counts to 6, 7, 8. He tells Taylor, "Are you okay?" Taylor doesn't respond because he thinks the fight's over. He waves the fight off with 2 seconds. Well, guess what? Something similar like this happened. Well, not really. Lisa tries to beat out her opponent, hurts Kathy, and with 2 seconds left of the fight, the referee decides to stop it because Lisa might not want to fight. But to be honest, if that's the case, it doesn't matter. The fight comes to an end, and the announcer announces 1 minute 58 seconds. Kathy Rivers is upset because the fight should have went 10 rounds of decision. The bell rung, and guys, when you watch the footage, you'll be shocked. It was so bad. And the reason the referee, Phil Austin, stopped the fight because she was taking too many flush unanswered punches. But it was a 2-minute round for each fight, so he should have realized the fight was over. But he might have stopped the fight because Kathy Rivers was going to win. But the problem is, it didn't matter because Lisa Marie scored a knockout in the 10th, which means she would have won anyway. And even though this fight did take place in Lisa's country, it wouldn't have mattered. So, yeah, it's really bad. And this was live on Australia Fox as we speak, which is another production. But yeah, it was really bad to see that. Because Lisa Marie already won the fight, even if the fight wasn't stopped. So the women's IBA title came to a bloody end of a bloody controversy. And to this day, Lisa Marie, well, the title would be vacant forever. I don't know what to say. What a weird way to end those belts. Take that for what you will. Yeah, take that for what you will. So, and it's just ridiculous. Oh, yeah, and speaking about ridiculous, just to end this off, guys, because I did forgot to mention one more little thing. Just one more little thing. And the results of that is going to be surprising. And I don't want to over talk about this for long, but I might as well. Remember when I talked about that there was something such as the women's IBO title? Well, when looking it up about Lucia Rijecker and her title win for the women's IBO title, fun fact, when I looked up on BoxRec, it said that the title is called the IBO World Super Lightweight title, question mark. And even though that title is still being held by Katie Taylor to this day, so when I even looked up the heavyweight fights, it only shows the Sonia Lamanokis fight versus Charlotte Ilou fight in 2014, December the 6th. And Sonia would win that fight, and that would be the only fight on the line. So, yeah. And people would call that the women's IBO title, but on BoxRec, it's called the IBO. So, take that for what you will. So, yeah, that's all I have to say, guys. So, yeah, guys, what do I have to say about this? Well, after 65 minutes of recording this, I will say this. You take a bunch of people in boxing when it comes to men, and you have a lot of male boxers, and us men have been around sports for a long time when we were in wrestling sheepskin trunks. Believe me, guys, we back in the old days of the 1800s, us men were performed sports back in the 1900s a long time, even when women were still in wearing high dresses. Heck, even the Olympic Games did not promote a lot of female sports until 1900 in France. And even when they did the inaugural golf tournament, like golf in 1900 in the Olympic Games, they had 36 holes for men, performing 18 holes of 2 rounds, while they had women only performing 9 rounds in the inaugural golf of the Olympic Games in golf in 1900. So yeah, it just goes to show you that there's not a lot of females in boxing, because as of right now in the 21st century, it's barely a new thing for us viewers to get used to. And with Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor and Carissa Shields and a little bit of Alicia Baumgartner and Michaela Mayer trying to bring that sport bigger to the women's world, they're doing a good job making boxing a little bit more entertaining than professional wrestling in WWE. Now, I'm not saying that the female wrestlers in WWE are not doing good, or neither the ones in AEW or TNA, even though they are trying, but we already know wrestling is a professional work. It's an act, it's preordained, it's predetermined, it's not real. Well, except the pain, because wrestling is not ballet. You still get hurt. So I wouldn't call it a work all the time, but the sport has changed. I feel like boxing and MMA has made the sport for women a little bit better as it is. I just think us men have to get used to that. And I've gotten used to it a lot more than wrestling. But when it comes to the top division of the heavyweight division and the super middleweight and such, there's not a lot of girls in those weight classes. So who knows? Is Carissa Shields in this Danielle Perkins fight that's going to happen February the 2nd, Flint, Michigan, going to be a success or a failure? All I know is, whatever it's going to be, I can't wait to see that fight, because I'm interested to see, is it going to end in a great knockout victory of an, oh my God, what a great win for Carissa Shields? Or is it going to end in a crazy upset for Danielle Perkins? Well, that's going to be a whole different story, and whoever's going to be undisputed, who knows? But yeah, it's going to be ridiculous. And guys, part 2 is going to be ridiculous. But we're going to get to part 2 for the road to the undisputed women's heavyweight champion in part 2 in about a couple weeks. But until then, even though I am going to make a part 3 after February the 2nd, when that match is over, I'm curious to see what's going to happen. Look at that last drop. Huh. But until then, guys, I like to say thank you, viewers, for watching this episode. Sorry for not being an entertainment, ladies and gentlemen. This episode, in my opinion, was a little bit boring for me, because I don't like talking about information that you people don't understand, but if you guys go to the links in the description and read the information I said, you might understand. So just keep that in mind. So, yeah, thank you, viewers, for watching this episode. And with that being said, Foxwolf says, out.